God, I am glad this game actually came out. Like, I was getting worried for a while there. This thing kept showing up at press events and tantalizing us with its massive bosses and unique aesthetic, and yet it kept getting pushed back. It is by sheer force of will on the part of Studio MDHR that we finally got to play this thing. But, wasn't worth the wait. Well, you guys know the drill by now. Let's break it down bit by bit and see if this shmup slash Contra slash Shadow of the Colossus slash 1920s cartoon hybrid plays just as good as it looks. Here's a quick question. Don't you just hate it when you're on a winning streak at a casino and then the devil shows up and takes advantage of your greed to trick you into running down his runaway debtors and collecting their souls for him? No? This is literally only applicable to me specifically? Yeah, story of my life. Honestly, any explanation I could give for the plot of Cuphead does not do it justice, or at least does it less than the dulcet tones of a barbershop quartet that greets you every time you hop onto the title screen. Shoutouts to Shoptimus Prime, who did a few songs like that in this game. Those guys are actually awesome. You should definitely check them out sometime. In fact, when it comes to the production side of things in this game, everything is awesome. The music was made using real big band and a real ragtime orchestra. Every sprite, every background, and every UI element is hand-drawn and painstakingly animated the old-fashioned way. Even the audio is filtered in such a way that it makes the Steamboat Willie art style more than just a simple gimmick. From the film grain to the silliness of the plot and the wacky scenarios you'll find yourself in, these guys committed to their bit, and it pays off in spades. Not even Stick of Truth can hold a candle to this game's levels of making you feel like you're playing an interactive cartoon. As for the gameplay though, that's a whole nother beast unto itself. On the surface, Cuphead is Contra, but only the bosses. You can find platforming stages that reward skillful play with coins that then allow you to buy power-ups, but it always comes back to these big battles, as beating them is the only way to actually progress. As a matter of fact, you can completely skip the run and gun stages if you don't care about the additional weapons and just want to go at it with a standard pea shooter. That is completely viable, if not more difficult. But if you feel like actually experiencing all of the game you paid for, you'll quickly find some serious strategy opening up to you in terms of what loadout you run. This is where the shmup comparisons come from. Do you focus on the better damage of the pea shooter, or do you stick with the reliability of the homing shot? If you go with the latter, you probably do so because using the normal weapon in a fight is too difficult or awkward. But you also do so knowing that the bosses will live longer than if you had figured out some way to fight them with the pea shooter instead, potentially making the battle harder than it would have been otherwise by virtue of them being able to throw more attacks at you before going down. These are the kinds of decisions Cuphead forces you to consider, and you're encouraged to figure them out quickly because, good lord, these bosses are unforgiving. Make no mistake, this game gets stupid hard as it goes, and it already starts pretty high on that scale. That alone means Cuphead is not going to be for everybody, which is fine. 100 other amazing games came out this year. If you want to play one that doesn't hate you, that is completely understandable. I'm not usually a big fan of challenging games either, but the reason this one doesn't drive me insane all comes down to iteration speed. Yes, you will most likely lose again and again, but even a complete battle typically takes less than 3 minutes. Add that to there being no load times when you restart the fight, and you will be right back to where you left off in the boss's health bar before you know it. In that sense, Cuphead feels a lot more like Super Meat Boy than Bloodborne. I'm constantly learning and improving, and the dead time between those breakthrough moments is so small that it doesn't feel like any of that was wasted. That makes it so much more rewarding to me than something like The Surge or Dark Souls, and that's also why I am always utterly absorbed in what's going on in these fights. I enter a trance when I play Cuphead. My eyes and my brain are wholly devoted to the screen when tangling with one of these monstrosities because I want to pick up on every little detail of what's happening, what I'm doing, what's working and what isn't, what new ideas I can employ and how quickly I can implement them into the strategy I had already developed. and because the game is so fast, there's no time for my thoughts to wander. There's no room for frustration to sink in and make me want to stop playing. Just a steady bout of progress and an ever-increasing new set of skills that will get tested further and further as I go. Oh, and just in case you think Cuphead isn't challenging enough, beating the game once unlocks Expert Mode on that file. Good luck with that. Another reason the difficulty doesn't really bother me is that 95% of the time, damage or death is your fault. As I said, Cuphead was kind of infamous for getting delayed a lot, but considering how polished it is, likely thanks to those numerous delays, I completely forgive it now. Practicing these bosses leads to a reliable strategy, and when the game is at its best, using the same strategies produces consistent results. That is the mark of good mechanical design, which Cuphead desperately needed to get away with being as hard as it is. The reason I say damage is only 95% your fault is due to design more than mechanics. Sadly, there is more than one boss that takes advantage of inconsistent elements. There are bosses that make their home in scrolling stages where the platforms you have to stand on are randomly placed, meaning you'll never have a consistent setup and will just have to react as you go. There are bosses with helper enemies that show up wherever they feel like, even when it leads to a situation where it's all but impossible to avoid taking a hit. This is especially egregious in one fight where the boss can freeze you in place and essentially force damage on you if the minions are currently firing projectiles. And anytime I'm fighting Baroness von Bonbon and get the waffle enemy right out of the gate, I just hit restart because the way I play, that thing just takes way too long to kill without a super. Where this really starts to become noticeable is when you're playing the game on a higher level, like if you're going for all A ranks or tackling the previously mentioned expert mode. The scoring system in Cuphead grades you on the following criteria: winning under a certain time limit, avoiding damage, parrying 3 enemy projectiles, using at least 6 bars worth of special moves, and playing the stage on at least regular difficulty. To earn an A rank, you can only make 2 mistakes total in any of these areas. Now, the stage only counts as being beaten when you clear it on regular, so that's a given. If you've played these fights enough, time won't be an issue, and you're constantly using super moves as is, so that just leaves damage and parries as the variables. Essentially, you can take 2 hits but have to land 3 parries, or you can ignore all but 1 parry but have to avoid any damage. For all the reasons I already mentioned, this is a lot harder than it needs to be. There is often no way to know where your parry opportunities are going to come from. You can't learn which randomly generated enemies are going to decide they want to shoot a pink bullet instead of a black one, and that's if you don't accidentally pop them first. It leads to these awkward situations where you're not shooting down the mook enemies in hopes they'll toss you a parryable projectile, or you're holding back on the boss for a second or two for fear of killing them too quickly, and that's just completely counterproductive to what the game is all about. It sucks because I'm at that point. I'm into the post-game where I'm trying to 100% everything, and it's just not happening in some of these fights. Past World 1, and even including one fight in it, if I get an A rank, it typically feels like I'm just getting lucky, which is the complete opposite from the feeling that led me to want to do this in the first place. Oh, and did I mention how all the super moves are worthless? The beam locks you in place and doesn't give you any invincibility afterwards, meaning before you get used to the timing, you're going to take at least a few hits trying to use what should be your most powerful tool. The plane super fixes that problem, by the way, so what happened here? The dedicated invincibility power-up barely lasts any time at all, and the Super Ghost is unusable because it's one more thing to keep track of in a game that already has way too many things going on at any given time for most normal people. That's the real kicker in this game. Regardless of how mechanically sound everything is, some things just don't feel right design-wise. How could they? It's the studio's first game. They were bound to get a few things wrong. It's disappointing, but it affects you far less if you're not a completionist, if you're willing to take advantage of that room for error and just want to play the game, as it were. So, take from that what you will. I haven't mentioned it yet because I think it's obvious just from looking at footage, but holy wow, this game is gorgeous. You know me, I'm a mechanics guy. I'm not typically one to say the art style is a selling point, but this is one of the few cases where it really, truly is. Yeah, it can be pretty sigh-inducing when you're seeing a pattern for the first time and die. All attacks have a tell, but until you understand what that tell is for, you probably won't be able to react to what's coming, leading to a very justified response of, oh, I didn't know that was gonna happen. But interestingly, that same sentiment is also half the fun. It's merry melodies, it's Dodo Land, it's an era of animation where you could have gotten away with literally anything. And they did. I'm actually being very careful with which bits of footage I show because I don't want to give away some of the cooler surprises. I don't want to spoil the roller coaster ride that is these boss battles. There's nothing out there at the moment that feels quite like Cuphead does when you're right in the middle of these fights watching the insanity unfold for the first time. So do I recommend you play Cuphead? Oh, absolutely. But not all of it. Take it from someone who's been there. If you want to enjoy yourself, don't go for A ranks, and especially don't go for S ranks in expert mode. Don't try to do pacifist runs of the platformer stages, and don't rip your hair out going for all the coins. Just play the game at its best, at a level of execution where everything has the room to feel just right. That is worth the effort. That is what's going to justify the price tag. And that is what makes this game something really special.